Hi and good afternoon. Welcome back to Sahara TV. Today we have Tony Abulu, who's the president and CEO of Black Ivory Communication, a multi-faceted media firm with 30 years experience in film production, entertainment, publishing, international marketing, and African tourism development. Mr. Abulu is also the president of the Filmmakers Association of Nigeria, USA. He's been a cultural ambassador. Mr. Abulu, welcome to Sahara TV.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll start off from the time that you first made your first film, which was called Back to Africa, which was very appropriate, actually, the title. And this was a sold-out film at the Pan-African Film Festival, yeah, and also at the African Film Festival in New York. So tell us a little bit about that film.
Well, thank you very much. 15 years ago, I was a publisher of a magazine called Black Ivory, which was a Pan-African magazine. Had been in New York 15 years before then, working on the film, doing tourism, talking about information about Africa at that time, which wasn't very prevalent, in America at the time. And then I realized, I said to myself, we really have to expand our reach. The magazine was doing well, but it wasn't really reaching the kind of people and the extent of the population that we wanted it to reach. So I said, I'm going to make films.
Now, you also organized a tour of 50 top Nollywood superstars and actors, and you also honored the legendary Hollywood late Ofsy Davis at that event as a grand patron for Nigerian film. So that was part of the tourism you had organized. How was it, or how difficult was it to bring all those people together on a trip at one time?
Well, it wasn't that difficult because Nollywood, as the Nigerian film industry is called, actually that has expanded now to contemporary African filmmaking. We call that the whole thing Nollywood. What happened was that I felt that they needed some sort of jump start. I felt that they were doing so much work in Nigeria, they were working so hard, and they hadn't received the credibility. And my interest was to take their films on a global level, and not just for the fun of it or just to make Nigerians feel proud. That may be part of it, but realistically, Africa doesn't really create its own products. What we have in Africa is people selling natural resources as a way of sustenance. And I felt that based on my experience living in the US, I felt this is the time that we have to create our own products in Africa. This is the time we have to market those products and distribute those products. And
now, when we talk about distribution, I'm also gonna, you're credited for creating and developing a well-structured DVD distribution chain in the US for African film. Now, when you talk of African film, can you describe, is it African film, Nollywood, or African film in general? Well,
my training doesn't make me say Nigeria alone. My training is African. I'm a Pan-Africanist. So, and I believe all are one. Whether you come from South Africa, you come from Nigeria, you come from Senegal, we're all Africans. And so anytime I create opportunities, I create it for Africans. So when we created the opportunity for distribution of African films, it was for the entire Africa. Of course, Nollywood is leading that charge now. Everybody's watching Nollywood films, which are the Nigerian films. And that has garnered a lot of viewership, a lot of support on the continent and in the US. And so I felt that we have to look at a situation where we have to distribute some of these products. It's not enough to make the movies. You can make the movies, you can show up at film festivals and show the film at film festivals. That doesn't do nothing for you. A few people watch it, but how do you, as a producer, make money? How do you repay the loans and so on? And that's why I said we have to create
so before we leave the distribution part, we have had problems of bootlegging. And most of the films I personally have seen from Nigeria are either bootlegged and sold on the subway station, in tacky little hairdressing stores in Harlem and Brooklyn and Queens. Now, you created this DVD distribution thing.
Yes.
How do you think we got to that place where now the hard work that you've put in, the hard work that the film producers have put in, the actors, to find a film going for $5 a part?
Well, let me put it this way. That was a major problem about 10 years ago. It still is. What we decided to do, when you create distribution, you have to also think about some of the problems that are inherent in it, like copyright infringement and so on. Filmmakers Association of Nigeria, which I'm president and CEO, we had a copyright conference with the U.S. government. And we were introduced to public interest intellectual property advisors, and that led all the way to creating a system where we make sure that nobody bootlegs the movies. We were engaged with the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, where they spent a lot of money to do an investigation, and they conducted a raid in 2010 in Brooklyn, and a lot of films were confiscated. A lot of people were arrested. And we used that opportunity to say to people, it's not that we want to arrest anybody.
Right.
We want to let people know. We want to let, because the guys who are doing this are actually continental Africans themselves.
Right.
And we want to let them know that there's a way everybody can benefit. There's a way everybody can make money, as long as you don't do it illegally. The problem with the Nollywood movies initially was that they were not copyrighted in the US. So everybody says, well, it's free for all. So we went through the process of creating copyright opportunities for them by copyrighting the films. That was phase one. Then we went to the next level where the movies that were being bootlegged on the internet, we actually had pro bono attorneys in the US that were given to Filmmakers Association of Nigeria in the US, and those guys were able to send out what they call DMCA letters and had those movies removed from the internet. What has to be understood is that when you're working for Africa sometimes, Africa is a little far. Right. So when you're working for Africans, the Africans themselves may not even know you're working for them. Or the Africans may sometimes just look at you and say, well, let's see what happens. So it is not, one of the things that I do, I travel to Africa a lot, and one of the things that I'm trying to do is to educate the Africans themselves.
So how do you educate them? Because I see a lot of bootlegs, like I've already told you.
Yes.
And I'm not going to own up and say I own any, but at the same time, how would you educate an African to say, please, this is our product, I'm working for you.
Yes.
Don't bootleg it. How do you do that?
The ones who are the criminals, they know that they're criminals. Trust me, they know, because we've gone around, we've taken adverts in newspapers in the US, all the African publications we've done. Personally, I've gone into almost every single African store in this country. I've appealed, I've appealed. I spent years, I'm talking about 10 years, to appeal to them, guys from Senegal, from Sierra Leone, from Mali, from Nigeria, from Ghana. I appealed to everybody. Initially, as we spent the first 5 years just explaining to people that you can't do this. This product belongs to somebody else.
So there's a film that you did called Crazy Like a Fox.
Yeah,
I believe this is one of the films that brought you to mainstream American cinema.
Yes.
Can you tell us exactly how this worked and who out of American cinema was involved in your film?
Well, I wear two hats. I'm a creative guy. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a film producer, and then at the same time I do all this other stuff, which are like activity driven, which I know that one can operate without the other. When I shot Crazy Like a Fox, I shot it because I was saying to the Nigerians that you can make a film that can go into mainstream American theaters. You can make a movie that can go into mainstream American DVD distribution, Walmart, Best Buy, Blockbuster. And the Nigerians will always tell me, no, that is not possible.
Right.
So I said, okay, this is what I'll do. I always try to open the way. If I tell you that you can do something, when I tell the Africans like to see physical example. Right. When I told them that this could be done, they all told me it couldn't be done. So
okay, so we'll fast forward and come to date.
Yes.
This is when Hollywood meets Nollywood.
Yes.
So the film is called Dr.Bello, and it centers on the life of the relentless cancer specialist. His name is Dr. Michael Durant, which is played by Isaiah Washington.
Yes.
And the character is lugging a lot of emotional baggage and also on the brink of a divorce. from his unstable wife, played by Vivica A. Fox,
Yes.
who is struggling to come to terms with the death of their only child.
Yes.
Okay, so now Dr. Durant becomes attached to Sam. Now, Sam is a cancer patient that
Yes.
is taken care of, a
yeah,
7-year-old boy,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
and who's white.
Yes.
So the patient, the health is very critical and it deteriorates, forcing Dr. Durant to seek the support of Dr.Bello,
Yes.
who's played by
Jimmy Jean-Louis.
Jimmy Jean-Louis.
Yes.
Okay, so they then engage in traditional practices on this guy.
Yes.
And without the consent of the hospital,
Exactly,
obviously.
exactly.
And this is a breach. So what follows is the story of love, a story of discovery, of new frontiers, and the return to one's roots when Dr. Bello then has to travel to Africa.
Yes.
And
Dr. Durant. Yeah,
Dr. Durant,
right,
actually.
Yeah, goes to Africa.
So
to look for that.
that cure.
That cure, right.
So after the film, after I watched it, I did a little review and I spoke to both black and white, African and anything else. And people were telling me that this was a fascinating story told by a cluster and fusion of two cultures.
Yes.
And this thing that the story vividly told was how important African remedies and stories and culture are.
Yes.
You actually had a small part as a doctor.
Dr. Lambo, yes.
Yeah. So can you tell us briefly how you came about writing this story and what your vision was?
I was planning to do another film.
Right.
And then I got a call from Isaiah Washington. You know, he wanted me to produce another film that he was doing in Sierra Leone. You know, he had done so much work in Sierra Leone and was trying to make a movie so that he could help that economy. We talked about it, and I said, you know what, Isaiah, why don't we go do this other film? And I was able to convince him, and I wrote the screenplay of Dr.Bello actually in 2 weeks.
Right.
You know, but the way I look at Africa, you know, having lived here for like 30 years, America that is, people don't know Africa.
True that.
You know, people look at Africa as a place where, especially they look at it from a contemporary point of view. I was lucky to study African studies. I was lucky to study African art. And these are courses that you don't find. And I went to college in Africa. You learn something. And then when I came to the US, I became Afrocentric. You learn something else. You learn about the history of black folks in America and so on and so forth, and your role in that whole structure. You learn about people like Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X who have paved the way. When you write a story, my film was targeted to Americans in general, but African Americans in particular.
In particular.
Because obviously everybody comes from Africa, but more recently African Americans, you know, came through a route which is not very ideal, you know, slavery, which they didn't have any hand in at all. So I see my role and the role of contemporary Africans who have that capacity to tell stories about the continent, to tell it from a point of view which people haven't seen, and that is a spiritual point of view. For me, Africa, you're not going to go to Africa and expect to see...
the story and the film is a spiritual journey.
A spiritual journey. You don't you don't look at Africa, because what we're trying to portray in Africa all the time is to show that we can be like the West. You know, we're always trying to say we have skyscrapers. We're always trying to say we have cars. We're always trying to say we have millionaires. That's fine. But that is not the true story of Africa. The story of Africa is the depth of Africa, which is a spirituality.
Right.
And so there's a problem happening in Africa today. Contemporary Africa is trying so fast to get away from ancient Africa.
Right.
You know, which is which is a disaster. Because when you get into Africa today, people, if you talk about anything African, they'll say it's fetish. If you talk about African art or beautiful mask, nobody's going to touch it. They're going to say it's fetish.
In fact, in the film, the viewer is made to believe that at the end, we're going to see some kind of roots,
right,
something tangible to say this is what he was looking for in the mountains.
Yes.
And then you get it at the end that it's the spirituality.
There you go. So let me shock you. A lot of Nigerians didn't get it. A lot of Nigerians said to me that, some even accused me that I lost focus at the end. Some people said that I ran out of ideas at the end.
Right.
I make films to provoke thought.
Which was quite in the
Yes,
right place.
I don't tell the whole story in the movie. I get you to a point, and you have to internalize that story and go on that spiritual journey and think. And a lot of people don't want to think. So, but after the movie was done, and people are asking questions, now people are asking me, oh, you're saying, what is the message? And I said, the message of the entire movie is death, as you know it, is only a part of living. You do not need to fear it. You should embrace it. That is the essence of the whole film. So the story about cancer and looking for a cure and all that, cancer is a debilitating disease. The whole world is scared of it. Everybody's, my mother-in-law died of cancer.
So,
but I would like to say this. It is not the end all. For those of us who have a spiritual understanding, we say, it doesn't matter how you leave this earth. Ultimately, you're going to a place of bliss.
You're not promised eternal life.
Yes, yes.
Okay, now, what do you think has been attracting Hollywood actors to come and join? I mean, you've told me about Isaiah Washington.
Yes.
But I see that there's a little trend growing right now. And Dr.Bello is actually one of those films that has kind of like recent and current.
Yes.
And which also had, a strong presence because you had St. John as one
Jimmy
of...
John Louis. We had Isaiah Washington.
And I'm talking of the technical
yes, you're talking about
too,
Scott St. John.
Who came and worked with you. And I know that you did this shooting. You said you wrote the screenplay in 2 weeks.
Yes.
And I think you also did the shooting in
the
2
entire,
weeks.
Yeah, we shot in 2.5 weeks.
Okay, and that says, was it a low-budget film or what they call low-budget film according to Nollywood standards or just...
Well, a movie like Dr.Bello ideally would have cost about between $5 to $10 million to make. The CGI alone would have cost $1 million. But when I make films or when I make a project, I don't want to make a film that my people back in Africa will look at me and say, well, Tony, you made a movie and won the Academy Award, that's good for you, but it doesn't do anything for us. What I do is this, I purposely make a film with a limited budget to show my people back home that you can do it. Because financing is really very tough in Nigeria. I got support from the Nigerian Intervention Fund, which was a loan. And so other people are coming. I'm greenlighting other movies that are coming like Dr.Bello. We're building a major studio.
Let's talk about that intervention fund because there's been talk of old money, new money. And I know that this was pledged by
President Goodluck Jonathan.
$200,000?
$200 million.
Million, actually.
Yeah, $200 million.
And you benefited from this.
I was the first producer to benefit from it. I'm still the only producer.
And I know that MTN and DSTV also jumped in. So tell us briefly how this worked and how you came about.
Well, it's all the whole process of can we create our own products and sell. Goodluck Jonathan, the president of Nigeria now says, look, we can't keep banking on selling oil and gas. Alone. We got to look for some other thing. What happens when America finds a new energy source? Then the whole money is coming from gas and
so
crude oil.
I know you had to even put your mother, 80-year-old mother's house.
I built my mother's house. I still had to put the house down as collateral. A lot of people look at it and say, Tony Abulu got a grant. No, I didn't get a grant. When I went to Nigeria, they said nobody could access the money. That it was an illusion, that it wasn't there. I said, listen, I don't believe your president is going to lie. I'm going to take your president in his word, and I'm going to apply for that intervention loan. And that's what I did, and I got the loan. So I always prove, like I told you before, I have to show the people that something is possible. If you say to Africans something is possible, they don't believe it until you show it. When you show it, when I came back, I was the first to get mainstream American distribution through a theatrical release of my film. So you got to be able to show that you can do this and then act upon it and do it. The intervention fund is there for everybody to access. The president recently just added another 3 billion naira, which is like $25 million, as a grant to the film industry. But what is critical is they must be able to have international distribution. It is one thing to make the movies in Nigeria. We have only about 50 screens in Nigeria, like 12, 13 cinemas. We're trying to build more cinemas. But we are talking about foreign exchange earning for Africa. This is what is missing. The Africans are going to be able to survive and work hard in Africa and do that. But what happens when all the African states realize that they can't keep selling their natural resources?
True.
Or when somebody finds out that when they decide that they're not going to buy any more of those resources, we got to create our own products, we got to market them, and we got to distribute them, especially in places like the United States of America.
Okay, so now moving on, we have a couple of minutes left.
Yes.
How do the ratings work in film? So
Yes.
I realize that, you know, we hear this film is rated this,
Yes,
PGA
yes.
or whatever. How do those work?
Well, you know, there's a body that decides, you know, how a film is rated. My film is a different kind of film. You know, I'm sure a lot of people have never seen this kind of film before in the U.S. And that's why AMC was kind enough to say, you know what, let's start and see how this audience builds up. My film, I will say, is rated G, which is for general audience. In Nigeria, it was rated general audience. There's no profanity, there's no gun shooting, there's nothing. It is pure spirituality.
Okay, now let's talk about auditioning. I know that in many Nollywood films, there's been reports that people are getting paid, you know, under the table just to audition in a film. Have you heard about that kind of?
I've heard about it, but I've never seen it. What I notice is that there's so much interest in Africa in the entertainment industry. Africa is not lacking talent at all when it comes to entertainment. What we need to do is how to harness all that talent. You know, be it in Zimbabwe, be it in Zaire, be it in Senegal. Harness that talent. This is what Africans have as a gift, you know, from God. And so we got to make it professional, and we got to make it in such a way that we can begin to make it viable. I think that in Nigeria especially, trust me, they have different guilds, they have the unions. It's not just anybody just doing anything. You know, you have the Actors Guild, you have the Directors Guild, you have the Director of Photography Guild, you have on and on and on.
I guess all the guilds that are out there. Yes. But now let me ask you, do you see African film or cinema getting united just as much as how Hollywood is?
Yes.
Nollywood and when they get united, don't you think there will be quite a powerful entity, because we are growing?
Yes.
And what kind of efforts have you done to lure in the others so that you stand together?
Let me put it this way. There's so many people working on this. Peace, Ayamo Sigwe created a major institution in Africa called the AMA Award, the African Movie Academy Award. Everybody goes there now. You know, it's African. So they're already united. What I bring to the table is the economy of film.
Right.
Make it viable so Africans can survive. It's one thing to do the art for art's sake. It's another thing to create the products and make them viable so Africans can benefit, they can survive. This is what we're looking for. And that's my
the other follow-up question. There's been a lot of movies coming out of South Africa. I mean, I'm talking about international distribution standard movies where people have played Winnie Mandela, they've played Nelson Mandela, they've played all sorts of heroes, African heroes, using American actors.
Yes.
Now, since you have started fusing that, what do you feel as an African filmmaker about using an international star to play an African hero? How does that work, and what do you feel inside about that?
Well, let me put it this way. Like I told you, for me, it is not art for art's sake. If you want to sell your film and make money from your film, it is very difficult to make money in Africa now. Extremely difficult. Nollywood...
It's important to tell the African
story. You know, it's fine. You can tell the story, but when you tell the story and you get $10 million from a bank and you can't pay back that money, then you realize when you want to make your next movie, you're going to have to do both. You tell the story and make sure it is viable. I think that having African Americans come to play lead roles in Africa, I think is fantastic. Right. I think that they're going to open us to a wider audience because they're already known. They're superstars in the world. You know, look at actors, different actors that have come in, you know, that have done exceedingly well and introduced major countries. For instance, Isaiah Washington has led this film. Vivica Fox, she has led this film.
But don't you believe that you can also groom your own African artists to stand on the international stage?
That's the whole idea. That's the whole idea.
At least they know the accents, they know the history.
Yes.
They understand. They don't have to sit there and read it or get coached.
Yes.
Because you cannot deceive the eye once it's on film.
Right.
It's being documented. We can see when they slip in terms of pronunciation. We can see when they're not too sure but playing a character. So don't you think that as much as you've put in the work, you can also maybe groom your own Africans to be able to stand internationally.
Trust me, that's exactly the plan. You can have in my film, the African American plays the African American. Isaiah Washington played an African American. Vivica Fox played an African American. Jimmy John Louis played a Nigerian. And the reason why he was able to do that was because Jimmy John Louis is from Haiti. I don't see the difference, you know. But all the Africans that were in the film, Genevieve Nnaji played a Nigerian doctor. Stephanie Okereke played a Nigerian. On and on and on. I played a Nigerian. So I'm not advocating that the African Americans should come play continental Africans. You know, that could happen, you know, when the budget of the movie is $50 million, like a Mandela, and you come with a major African American actor. I'm looking for a day that the continental Africans can play those roles. But you have to also realize that people who are making movies are business people. They want to recoup their monies. And if you put a lead actor that is not known, you know what I mean? It is very difficult. You can work, but you're going to have to spend a ton of money when it comes to marketing the film. And the Africans don't have the money to market the film. So they go the easier route. And there's actually, let me put it this way to you. It is good for Africans to play Africans, but I believe that African Americans have a major role to play in African filmed entertainment. Right. They are the ones that are going to open the global door. Trust me, if they're not in the movies, it is extremely, extremely difficult for especially theatrical release movies. Now, let me just add to that. Okay. The Nigerians that created Nollywood without any American actors have done a marvelous job on the DVD circuit. Now, I'm the president of the Filmmakers Association. I'm in charge of distributing the movies on DVD. I've done it for 20 years. My point to you is this. DVD distribution of 20,000 copies per title is different from 2 million copies of DVD. When you sell a DVD copy for $2 wholesale, it's different from when you sell it for $12 wholesale. Africa needs support. Africa needs money. And we cannot continue to beg people to give us aid and sell only mineral resources.
Thank you very much, Tony Abulu. Now, in closing, how is the distribution of your film, Dr. Bello?
It's fantastic. We open in 20 major cinemas in the U.S., including the Empire 25 on 42nd Street. Unfortunately for us, we didn't have enough money for marketing. I was saying to the Nigerians that, listen, it is not enough to make the movie. You have to have enough money for marketing. And now they've realized it. Now we're going to DVD. We're going to be in Walmart. We're going to be in Best Buy. We're going to be in Redbox and on and on and on through a distribution which I already secured it with my past film, Crazy Like a Fox. Dr. Bello, I believe, will do extremely well. It is a story that is unusual. It is a story that I believe Americans will enjoy.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for coming to SaharaTV. It was a pleasure speaking to you. We're going to continue with our programming. Please stay tuned. I'm Fungai Maboreke. Thank you.